after Pakistan was eliminated from the group stage with the loss to Ireland. That moment was soured when it emerged that Bob Woolmer had died. A lot of people still think he was murdered. You think he was murdered. What do you remember about that scenario as it unfolded during the tournament? And just take us through it from your perspective. What do you think honestly happened?
I was in St. Kitts, and I get a phone call, and I know who it is. Happy to name names on this one because I was a big fan. Tony Still, out of England, was one of our top cricket producers. He still is. He's one of those guys that runs around with TV crews and produces world cricket all over the world. And Tony was one of our top guys. And he calls me and says, "Don, is it true?" Well, I don't know what he's talking about. And he goes, "Woolmer." I said, "Amazing game yesterday. Amazing. Can't believe Ireland beat Pakistan." He goes, "Well, there's a lot of people who think it was a thrown game," he says. I said, "Well, what's the issue, Tony?" He says, "We're going on the air in a few minutes. Was Woolmer's death natural, or what are the police saying?" This is the first I heard. I had no clue. I said, "I'll get back in touch with you." I immediately called Chris Deering, and he goes, "Don, I'm with Scotland Yard." I said, "So it's true?" He goes, "Well, he's dead." Chris, I said, "What's happened?" He goes, "Well, we're going to wait for the coroner to make his judgment." I said, "TV's asking for a comment right now." I said, "Chris, we've just had our Atlanta bombing." We had talked about that a lot. We had talked about the fact that the 1996 Olympics had a scar because of the bombing in the Olympic Park. You can watch the movie now about Richard, what's his last name?
Richard Jewell, yeah.
Richard Jewell, thank you. See, I know you always win every contest, sports trivia contest. So, I was part of that. I was there that night. So I knew what that did to the Atlanta Olympics. And I just would tell you that we had talked about it internally a lot. What we've got to make sure everything that could possibly be a catastrophe is handled quickly and swiftly and well. You may or may not know or remember that a few days earlier, Pakistan was in a hotel and India was in a hotel in Trinidad, and they were doing warm-up matches in Trinidad. And there was a bomb scare at the team hotel at like 5 a.m. So this was not our first episode with a potentially bad thing. We got India and Pakistan in the same country in warm-up matches. And it was a very scary moment then. So we're all on high alert. Our security people are on high alert. We're not talking about it. We're just doing our best. And I'll just say that when the Jamaican coroner came out and said he had been strangled, I've never doubted that. A few days later, Scotland Yard came back with a different version. There's too many other things, Peter, that probably we need a whole hour and a half on that had me convinced from that very first day. Bob Woolmer wasn't a drinker, and yet somebody sent champagne to his room after a loss. That's a strange thing. Somebody brought that champagne to him. That's room service. There are other people around the team that have never been seen since the incident. I mean, even local people who were kind of there to help the team out. I don't know the details, but I would just say I've never been convinced otherwise. And those were sad days, of course. It just made sense to me at the time. It still does.
Something like this, you say you prepare for it, but even despite all the preparations you can do, when something like this happens, it can floor you. Having that happen and the way that it happened, the sequence that it happened after that, literally less than 24 hours after the Ireland win over Pakistan. What did that do in terms of not just the fear and the uncertainty over what exactly happened to Bob Woolmer, but again, the Pakistan team and the context of the tournament itself? Was there any discussion at that point in time in terms of, do we need to take a step back here? And was there any thought to putting the tournament on pause and possibly going into a further investigation? Or is this something that, for lack of a better way of putting it, you just compartmentalize it, tournament's got to go on?
Well, we surely did not compartmentalize it. When I got off the phone with Chris Deering and had to return the call to Tony Still of the broadcast service, I just said, look, I think the only comment that can be made is we're very sorrowful about the news of Bob's death, and we're letting Scotland Yard, the Jamaican Constabulary Force, and others look into it, and there'll be comments by Chris Deering and Malcolm Speed later. So now we get to Malcolm Speed, who I call immediately, and who I called Chief. I loved working with Malcolm Speed, the Australian ICC CEO. And I said to him, I said, Chief, you obviously know about the Woolmer story. He goes, Don, you got to get me on a plane as soon as possible. He was in St. Lucia. So we did. I actually had friends in St. Kitts who were able to work out a plane to take CEO Malcolm Speed to Jamaica so he could get there without going through standard airline issues. So Malcolm went there, and I really did leave it to Chris and Malcolm Speed, who now are both in Jamaica, and leaving it with their dealings with the Woolmer family, with Pakistan, with the ICC, with the police, etc. Again, I was the chief operating officer. My job was to run the day-to-day business of the games. Stadiums were done, so now I'm the COO. Chris, as the CEO, was managing the politics, the money, the marketing, and the media. So effectively, his day-to-day got very, very well caught into that. So Malcolm Speed and Chris were now they had to remain in Jamaica. They just had to be there for the daily press conferences and the things that were taking. And, it was maybe to the benefit of the event, a week or two. I'd have to go back and see how long it took. But when Scotland Yard did their own independent assessment and their own coroner's report, they came back and said it was natural causes. Maybe it's unfair to say, but I think by the time we got into it, it got back to its normal course of events because of what Scotland Yard had said. I just personally have never let it go from my gut. In fact, the day after, the evening of the death, I happened to have dinner with Rory Stain of South Africa. Rory Stain is a name you should know. Rory would be a great interview. Rory is South African who was in charge of all security for the South Africa World Cup. But before that, he was the head of the bodyguards for Nelson Mandela. He's written a book about being that. And so when Mandela became prime minister, Rory had already been the former prime minister's head of security, and now here he was. And when you see the movie Invictus about the Rugby World Cup being in South Africa, there is a actor who plays Rory's part very, very well. So I was with Rory, and again, we just felt what the information we were getting, it wasn't very simple. Let's put it that way. And so for the World Cup to move on, it was a hard decision, and the decision was to move forward. Pakistan gets knocked out. The World Cup changes when India gets knocked out. We had thought there would be a Pakistan-India match in Kensington Oval for a quarter final, and instead it was Bangladesh versus Ireland. Now you can imagine what that did to the ticketing. The England-South Africa match was massive, but the Ireland-Bangladesh match didn't quite have the flow we were expecting with what we could have predicted to be a Pakistan-India match. So didn't get to have that one. So the game went on.